Hello, everybody. Hey, as always, I'm Andrew Duvall, and I'm once again joined by my forever her friend Cade Bonzel. And welcome back to We're Talking Movies. And today we're doing a film that both of us are big fans of, me in particular, because I went to school in basically Derry, Maine. We're talking about 2017's It, or It Chapter 1, if you want to be pretentious. Cade, what do you have to say about this fine little horror movie?
I honestly think that this might be one of my favorite horror films of all time, along with other films that we've reviewed, like The Conjuring and Get Out. Yeah, I think this might actually be one of my favorite horror films ever. And a part of it is because of the fact that it's a Stephen King story. I think that this is probably one of the best Stephen King stories that he's ever created. And I think that this is also one of the best adaptations of his work that we've ever seen. So, yeah, but first off, one thing I want to talk to you about is the story. The story for this film is just so fantastic. What are your thoughts on the story of this film? Are you a fan?
I quite like this one. I don't know if we'll ever cover the sequel, but I definitely like this one better than It Chapter 2. And I think the decision to cover only the first half of the book effectively in this movie was a good choice because I feel like if they tried to squeeze the entire book into one movie, it wouldn't really work. But it's a very unique story. Like, yes, it's kids versus monsters, but it's monster that they know for a fact they really don't have the strength to go up against from the very beginning.
Right. Yeah, and I think that what's another cool thing about it is, well, before I get into what I was going to say, I've actually seen online some people say that the story of it, the book and the films, they think that it's similar to it's like Stand By Me or The Goonies as a horror film. And I think that that's always been a very amusing way of looking at it, and I kind of get what they mean, but I think that what's cool about the story of this film is it's not another formulaic horror film where you just wait around predicting which character is going to die or get killed by the monster, and you just sit around predicting when a jump scare is going to happen. And this movie does have a lot of jump scares, but I do think that what's unique about it is that the horror villain, Pennywise or the monster, isn't just scaring the kids for the sake of scaring them, just for no reason. It's scaring them because it needs them to be afraid so that they can be vulnerable and therefore make it stronger. And I think that's a unique way of portraying the villain of the film. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it gives a character her action, it gives a villain actual motivation and stakes, and also helps give Pennywise the kind of sinister glee that he really needs as a character.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I actually think that the story of it, both the book and the films, I think that it's a lot more than just a horror story. I think it's also a story that has to do a lot with friendship and what you're willing to do for the people you care about. And also, I think it's a really good story that focuses on how to overcome your fears as well.
Hmm. Well, I mean, that's a very big part of the movie, and especially the second movie, but that's still pretty damn big in this one too. Especially after Pennywise kidnaps Beverly, and all the other losers have to kind of realize that we need to come together and actually fight this thing, even though we don't have a hope in hell of beating it. We really need to at least try.
Well, and that's what I think is unique about it because it shows that the characters and that, we might be afraid, but that doesn't mean that we can't fight back. And that's, I think, a great approach for how you overcome your fears and how you're willing to fight them. So that's done very well. Another thing that is amazing with this movie is Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise. Oh man, what a performance he gave. His performance as Pennywise was so incredible. And I actually think it competes with Tim Curry's performance as Pennywise because don't get me wrong, Tim Curry's performance as Pennywise was good in the miniseries, but I think his version felt a little bit more like a serial killer Pennywise, whereas Bill Skarsgård, I thought, brought new life to the character, and he honestly made Pennywise feel a lot more demonic, like he's supposed to be. You know how he's a shape-shifting demon? He made the character more demonic, whereas I think Tim Curry, again, while he did a good job, he didn't do that as well as Bill Skarsgård did.
And I completely agree. I think Tim Curry's he's Pennywise is more akin to somebody like say John Wayne Gacy.
Yes.
Again, just the straight up violent dark serial killer. Bill Skarsgård, again, number one, he's got much more of a violent, sinister glee about him when he's killing people. Be it Georgie at the beginning of the movie or The little girl at the beginning of the second movie, there's this edge or there's this air of, oh yes, I'm getting to kill people. I'm very, very happy about it.
Right. Yeah, of course.
And another thing that I actually prefer about Bill Skarsgård's Pennywise as opposed to Tim Curry's is actually his costume. Tim Curry's Pennywise basically just looks kind of like a normal clown,
Yeah.
like a regular circus clown. The fact that for Bill Skarsgård's they went with more kind of like a almost Victorian 1800s inspiration
Yes.
for his costume, and the fact that they gave him the gigantic, unnaturally large forehead with the weird hair, I think kind of adds to the creepy, sinister nature of Pennywise. Plus the fact that Bill Skarsgård can do that weird thing with his lips, where it just drools out the front, I think also adds to it.
Yeah, especially with what he's able to do with his eyes as well.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, so he was definitely one of the standouts of the movie, and I honestly don't think that the movie would have been what it was if they hadn't cast him in the role. I think that only he could have brought the life that it was. I think other actors probably could have done a good job, but I think he really brought something special to the portrayal. But another thing that is fantastic with this movie would have to be the Losers Club, all seven of the friends. I just love the Losers Club in general because each character has their own distinguishing personality, fear, and I think also each role to play in the movie. And they bring, like Bill Skarsgård does with Pennywise, they bring so much life to the film and they make the film feel believable. I think the friendship between them is really the heart of the film, and it's really what keeps you like invested because you want them when you become invested in these characters, you want them to succeed, you want them to stop Pennywise, you want them to survive, and that's what is really unique about how the kids portray them and all the actors. And I think that speaking of the actors have such good chemistry together, and it makes the friendship between the kids feel believable, so that's really important.
absolutely. I think if you're going to make a good It adaptation, you got to nail two things. You got to nail Pennywise and you got to nail the Losers Club.
Right.
And this movie did really well with both. Again, this is a very, very talented young cast, and they had really good chemistry. And getting good performances out of one child actor is difficult. Getting good at performances out of what is it, seven child actors?
Right.
Getting again seven really good performances is not only a testament to them as actors, but also Andy Muschietti's directing.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think that in terms of the acting and the characters in general, I think Finn Wolfhard as Richie and Jack Dylan Grazer as Eddie, to me, were the two standouts in the Losers Club. I just thought that they felt the most believable and alive, and I just liked their personality. I also really liked their dynamic with each other and the dynamic that they had with all the rest of the friends. I did like Bill, I liked Beverly, I liked Ben, I liked Mike, I liked Stan, I liked everybody in the group, but Richie and Eddie just felt like the true standouts of the Losers group, in my opinion. Do you agree, or did you like another kid better?
I tend to agree. I also think Beverly really sticks out
Oh, absolutely. She really does stick out. Yeah.
because she did, I can't remember the actress's name off the top of my head, but she does a very good job at portraying somebody who is clearly mentally scarred, but trying not to show it to the rest of the world because she knows she's going to get made fun of even more.
Sophia Lillis.
Sophia Lillis, thank you. Again, I could see the face, but for the life of me, I can't think of the name. But yeah, she does a very good job at portraying this very emotionally and mentally damaged character that is really not trying to show it to the rest of the world.
Right.
And I also like that they tease, I don't know is the best word, but tease what's going on in Beverly's personal life. And they don't really show it too much, which I think was a good decision.
Yeah, and I think that that really relates to another pro that I have with the movie. I really love how this movie uses horror. The way that this movie uses horror is really well because it portrays horror really well, not only through jump scares, which we do see quite a few jump scares in this movie, but I think that some of them are actually pretty creative and original. I especially want to talk about the one jump scare when they're in the garage and they're going through all the photos and then we see Pennywise emerge from it and then he becomes a giant. I think that that was a very well done jump scare.
Yeah, that works actually only as its own little, mini horror movie on its own. And the fact and there's a lot of creativity in this movie.
Yes, there is. And I attribute a lot of that to Andy Muschietti's direction.
Absolutely. Again, he was he was the perfect choice to direct this. He really was.
Yeah, he was. And I had known about his work as a director on a film like Mama, which I think it's a good horror movie, and I was excited to see what he could bring to the story of it, and he did very well. And another thing that, in terms of how the film uses horror and what Andy Muschietti captures very well in terms of how to make this film so unsettling, would have to relate to the atmosphere and the setting. Again, this is another movie that takes place in New England, and for us as New Englanders, that for me personally, that kind of makes it feel a little bit more terrifying. And I love how Stephen King sets so many of his stories in New England. And I think that because of that, the fact that it did take place in Maine, that was, I think, the perfect setting for this story.
And I completely agree. And this actually allows me to explain what I said at the beginning of the episode. I went to college in the town of Machias, Maine, which is
Yes.
this tiny, tiny town in down east Maine, about 2 hours north of Bangor. And if you look at it, it literally looks like it just came out of a Stephen King novel because it's tiny, tiny town in Maine where there's some dark history under the surface as you begin to learn about. So that's why I made the joke that I basically went to school in Derry. So
Yeah, I get what you mean. But I think that aside from the setting and the atmosphere and the jump scares, another thing that I think makes this film very horrifying and unsettling would have to just be the antagonists to the film. And this relates to not only Pennywise, who obviously brings a lot of he just brings a very eerie presence to the film, but also I look at characters like Henry Bowers and Mr. Marsh, Beverly's dad. Both of them are very unsettling and disturbing characters, just their personality and their actions and this type of presence that they bring on screen. They are also part of what makes the film scary.
exactly, yeah. You're dealing with different in types of horror. You're dealing with supernatural horror, you're dealing with emotional horror, and you're dealing with physical horror, if that makes any sense.
No, yeah, that does make a lot of sense. And I think that, but before we get into our cons of this movie, I will say that I just want to talk about It Chapter 2 really quick. So, It Chapter 2, it's not as strong as this movie, but I still think it is a satisfying conclusion to what this movie set up. And I do enjoy it for the most part.
I do. I'm a bit more critical of two because there is some major pacing issues. It's a nearly 3 hour movie that really doesn't need to be a nearly 3 hour movie.
Yeah, I get what you mean. I still do like it for the most part, but aside from that, yeah, why don't we get into our cons with this movie? Do you want to start?
Sure. I don't have a ton of cons with this movie. I do have a couple of little ones. Number one is the CGI in this movie is rough.
Yeah, it kind of is. Yeah, I get where you're coming from with that.
Like the one that comes into the one that always comes to mind first is the woman in the painting.
Right.
Like that looks, oh god, that looks so bad.
Well, actually, fun fact about that before we really talk about it more. I think that I read somewhere, and I could be wrong, but I think I read that that scene with the flute lady in the painting, I think I read that that's the only scene in the movie that genuinely scared Stephen King.
I have read that, and I, for the life of me, can't figure out why. Because again, that's one of the more number one. It's one of the more obviously set up jump scares
Yep.
there's in the movie, and number two, it just doesn't look that good. And that's not the only part of it. Like when Pennywise is in the sewer and he's biting Georgie's arm, that doesn't look that great either.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, the CGI isn't like amazing in this movie, but it's not necessarily like it's not bad.
No, and but I just feel like a couple of those things maybe could have been done with practical effects and they would have looked a lot better. I understand this wasn't the most expensive movie in the world to make. They didn't have the biggest of budgets, but some of those things I feel like they still could have easily done with practical.
Yeah, I get what you mean. I think that though, for me with my cons, again, I don't have a lot of cons with this movie. One in particular that comes to mind would have to be with the climax of the film. Now, the climax of this movie is not bad, don't get me wrong. I just think that when they have their final battle with Pennywise, when they go down to find Beverly and they get lost in the sewers and then they confront him, I think that the climax kind of loses some of the suspense that the movie had built up for the most part. And here's why I say that. So, again, it's a satisfying climax, but I think the final battle is dragged out a little too much. And I say that because there's that scene where they have their whole monologues with each other when Bill accepts that his brother is dead and he gets captured by Pennywise. And Richie explains, this is all your fault. You made us do this, but now we have to kill this clown. And to me, they could have just gone straight into fighting Pennywise. And I just thought the suspense was kind of lost with those monologues. It was just kind of dragged out a little bit for me. and I kind of felt that when I first watched it in the theater. I don't know if you feel the same way at all.
I do, but for a different reason. The fact that Pennywise was just sitting there patiently letting them do this monologue
Yeah,
kind of took it out a little bit for me.
yeah, it's again the climax is still satisfying, and I really like seeing the kids fight Pennywise at the end. That it just kind of lost some of the suspense that most of the movie had built up, in my opinion. Now, my last con with this movie has to do with the Losers Club, and what I mean by that is the plot armor that they have. And I think this relates to what I think a lot of people were talking about. They said, it's so easy for these kids to escape Pennywise, but it's difficult for all the other kids to escape. They always get captured, or killed. But what they leave out from the book is the fact that the Losers Club actually has big plot armor. And I know that this is something that you're not a fan of from the book, having to do with the giant turtle, right?
Yeah, like I love Stephen King, but you can definitely tell this was written at the peak of his drug addiction.
Right.
Because where the blue hell do you come up with that idea otherwise?
Well, I do get why they didn't include it in the movie, because the kids are under the protection of this cosmic, godlike turtle, this giant turtle god. I get why they didn't include that. That wouldn't have translated too well on the screen, probably. But I think that they could have had more of an explanation for how the kids are why it's so easy for them to escape while other kids can't. They could have made that more, not fully explored, but just explained a little bit more. But again, I do kind of get why they didn't include that, because it probably wouldn't have matched very well with what was going on.
Yeah, you could have done something like that, or you maybe could have had the kids maybe not get away as unscathed as they did.
Right.
I know it really wouldn't tie into the book, but maybe have the only one that really gets away, the only one that really doesn't get away unscathed is it Eddie, the little Jewish kid?
Stan.
Stan. I haven't watched it in a while, so keeping some names straight is a bit of an issue for me to begin with. So the fact that Stanley's the only one who doesn't really get away unscathed, yes, that ties into his character later on in the second movie, but maybe had a couple of the other kids maybe get some scars, or shall we say, some battle scars.
I mean, at least Eddie breaks his arm, but again, that was in the book.
Yeah, but I'm so glad they didn't do the giant turtle thing.
Yeah, and I'm kind of glad we didn't really see it in the second movie either, and I kind of get why they didn't do it again. But other than that, other than those cons, I still love this movie a lot. I think it's fantastic. But what would you give it for a rating on a scale of 1 to 10?
Um, it's kind of a tough one because I do have some faults with it, but I also really did like it. I'm gonna say an 8.25. I did thoroughly enjoy this movie, and it is definitely in my top 10. And again, I do have a soft spot for King.
Yeah, I think I'll have to agree. I think I give it an 8.5 because I love so many things about it. And despite those minor cons that I have with the movie, I do think that it still is one of my favorite horror films. And yeah, I'm going to have to give it an 8.5. But yeah, I guess that's all we have to say. Thanks so much for listening, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And yeah, we will see you later. Thanks. Bye.